Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into something pretty powerful this time, a verse that's really stuck with me. Hosea 2.17.
Yeah.
And specifically, that part that says, I will remove the names of the Baals from her lips.
It really grabs you, doesn't it? That imagery.
It does. It does. And it's one of those lines that you kind of read and you're like, whoa, I don't know if I'm worshiping idols. I don't have little statues or anything.
Right.
But it's got to be deeper than that.
Right, absolutely. It goes way deeper. I think for a lot of us, we read verses like this and we think, well, that's an Old Testament problem, not something we deal with today.
Yeah.
But if we really unpack the concept of Baals, I think we'll find it's way more relevant to our lives than we might realize.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So let's break it down. What are we talking about here when we say Baals in the context of Hosea?
Well, Hosea was a prophet writing to the Israelites, God's chosen people, right?
Okay.
But they'd wandered away from their covenant with God.
Oh,
They
okay.
started worshiping these Canaanite gods called Baals. And Baal itself, it isn't actually like a specific name. It's more of a title, meaning Lord or Master.
Oh, so it's like they were putting other things in the place of God, making them their Lord or their Master. Interesting. But what were these Baals? Like, were they actual physical idols or something else?
Well, sometimes they were actual like physical statues or representations, but the idea went way beyond that. It was about where they were placing their trust. They were attributing all the good things in their lives, their success, their good crops, you name it, to these false gods. So imagine, like, you're a farmer back then. You're desperate for rain.
Yeah. Heck, gotta have that ring.
Exactly. You need a good harvest. So you might start thinking, well, maybe if I offer a sacrifice to Baal, he'll make it rain for me.
Ah, I see. So you're putting your faith in something other than God to make it happen. It's almost like instead of acknowledging all the work you put into, say, winning a game, you're giving all the credit to your lucky socks.
Exactly. It's misplaced trust. Putting your faith in something that can't really deliver.
But how does that translate to us today? I mean, we don't have these Canaanite gods running around.
Yeah.
Right.
No, not in the same way. But I think the human heart, it hasn't really changed that much. We're still prone to putting things in God's place.
Yeah.
Making them our lords or our masters, even if they don't look like the idols of the Old Testament.
So we might not have literal statues in our living rooms, but we've got our own set of modern-day Baals, huh?
We do. And recognizing what those are is the first step in understanding how Hosea's message is just as relevant today as it was back then.
Okay. I am definitely seeing where you're going with this. So let's dig into that. What are some of these modern Baals that might be lurking in our lives, demanding our allegiance, vying for that top spot that should belong to God?
Well, if we think about it, what were those ancient Israelites really seeking from these Baals? Security, provision, control over their circumstances.
Right.
And you start to see those same desires playing out in our lives today.
That's a good point. It's not so much about the specific idol or deity. It's more about that deeper need or desire that's driving us, isn't it?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head there. Remember that example we were talking about? Giving all the credit to your lucky charm for winning the game?
Yeah.
Harmless superstition. Right. On the surface. But underneath, there's this need for control, this desire to feel like we can influence unpredictable outcomes.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this play out with those bigger bells, though? The things that can really take hold of our lives?
Well, let's look at something like materialism, for example. Our culture is obsessed with stuff, with the idea that happiness comes from having more things.
Right. Oh, yeah.
On the surface, it's just shopping, right?
Yeah.
But underneath, I think there's often this deep insecurity, this belief that our worth is tied to what we own. So we end up putting our faith in things, in possessions, to give us a sense of identity, security.
Yeah.
And that's something that ultimately only God can truly provide.
That makes me think about, like, the whole comparison game we get caught up in on social media. Scrolling through all those perfect homes, the perfect vacations, the perfect families.
Yes.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of feeling like I'm not enough.
Absolutely.
And I think you're right. It goes back to that longing for validation, for that sense of belonging that we're talking about.
Social media, it can be a breeding ground for modern day Baals. It feeds on our insecurities, our desire for approval, our fear of missing out. We end up worshiping the idol of popularity, constantly seeking likes and comments just to feel validated.
Yeah. It's like our worth is measured in likes, and it's so empty. And it's not just material things or social media, though, right?
Yeah.
These Baals can take so many different forms in our lives.
Oh, absolutely. Anything that we allow to control our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors.
Okay.
It could be that career that just completely consumes us, leaving no room for anything else.
Yeah.
It could be an unhealthy relationship, where we're compromising our values or just sacrificing our own well-being just to please somebody else.
Right.
It could even be, and this is a tough one, it could even be a distorted image of God himself.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
A harsh, demanding judge who's just waiting for us to mess up.
Oh, man. That one hits close to home.
Yeah.
I think so many of us struggle with that image of God as this cosmic scorekeeper,
Yeah.
always watching, always waiting for us to make a mistake.
It's a common struggle for sure.
Yeah.
And it completely misses the point of grace, doesn't it? I mean, the whole message of the gospel is that we are loved and accepted, not because of what we do, but because of who God is and what Jesus has already done for us.
That's so true. So powerful.
Yeah.
But if we've let these Baals take root, how do we start to unravel those patterns? How do we even begin to dismantle these things and experience the freedom Hosea is talking about?
Well, the first step is simply recognizing them, isn't it?
Mm.
Bringing them into the light, acknowledging they're there, and they do have power. And then it's about intentionally shifting our focus, turning our hearts back towards the one true God, the one who offers us so much more than these fleeting idols ever could.
So it's a journey then, not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process of transformation.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive. The practical steps we can take to move from just recognizing these Baals to actually experiencing the freedom and devotion that's available to us in our relationship with God.
All right, so we've identified some of these modern-day Baals that can kind of sneak into our lives.
Yeah.
But now the big question is, how do we actually start living in that freedom and devotion that Hosea is talking about? It all sounds a little daunting, honestly.
I hear you. It can definitely feel that way. But, remember that phrase from the verse, I will remove the names of the Baals.
Right, yeah.
It's not a command. It's a promise. God is actively involved in this whole transformation process.
Okay, so it's not like we're just on our own trying to muscle our way through this. Phew, that's good to hear.
Definitely not. But practically speaking, where do we start, right?
Yeah, where do we start?
Well, I think it starts with a shift in perspective. So instead of just focusing on what we need to stop doing,
Right.
let's think about what we can start embracing. What does it look like to actually replace the names of those Baals with the name of the Lord?
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
That's a much more positive approach. So it's not about suppressing those desires for approval or control. It's about filling that space with something better, something more true.
Exactly. And that something better is the love and the grace of God. When we really grasp how deeply we're loved and accepted by him,
Yeah.
those other things start to lose their grip.
Like those counterfeit Baals are promising something that only God can truly deliver.
Right. They're cheap knockoffs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But how do we actually make that shift tangible, like in our everyday lives?
Well, I think it comes down to those moments when you feel that pull, That pull towards a Baal, like maybe you're scrolling through social media and you're tempted to compare yourself to someone.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Right. Or maybe you're feeling super anxious about work.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just trying to fight it off, pause for a second, acknowledge it, and then intentionally turn your attention to God. Remind yourself of his truth.
So it's about being mindful, catching those thoughts early on and choosing to redirect them.
Exactly. It's like we're retraining our brains to focus on what really matters.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also sounds exhausting, like a constant battle.
It can be, especially at first. But here's the thing. The more we do it, the easier it gets. And the more we experience that peace and joy that comes from being rooted in God's love, the less appealing those counterfeit Baals become.
It's like those cravings start to fade as we taste the real thing.
Right. The real satisfaction that comes from a deep relationship with God.
Yeah, that's good.
And it's not just like a mental exercise either.
Okay.
Our actions matter too. How are we actually spending our time, our energy? Are we prioritizing the things that line up with our values?
It's about putting our faith into action, right? Making choices that actually reflect our desire to live in freedom and devotion to God.
Absolutely. That might mean setting boundaries in relationships that aren't healthy. Maybe being more generous with what we have. Or even just choosing to be more present with the people we love instead of getting lost in the digital world.
Yeah. It's about really living out that reality of Hosea 2.17. Not just removing the names of those Baals from our lips,
Right.
but actually removing their influence from our hearts and minds.
And as we do that, we experience that transformation.
Hmm.
The freedom and the joy that Hosea promised, they become more than just ideas. They become our lived reality.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. It's amazing how an ancient text can speak so directly to the things we struggle with today. But more importantly, it's a powerful reminder that true freedom and fulfillment, they don't come from chasing those fleeting idols. They come from embracing the love of the one true God.
And as you go about your day, remember that question we talked about earlier. What would it look like to actively replace those Baals in your own life, in your own thoughts, in your own choices with the name of the Lord? I think as you do that, you'll start to experience the power of God's grace in a whole new way.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We hope this has encouraged you to take a closer look at what might be vying for your attention and to embrace the freedom that comes from living in true devotion to God.